There's a row of peonies by the front porch that only started blooming properly 3 years ago. The soil here is stubborn clay, heavy and slow to drain, but I worked it by hand, kneeling every morning with a rusted towel and sore knees until the roots took. Now they bloom in thick, blushing rounds every spring, soft and full, like the cheeks of babies I never held long enough. I don't let anyone cut them. They're not for Voses. They're for me. After Edward Blake died, this house became my second skin. I painted the kitchen cabinets that hide their dings with matte navy. I replaced the mailbox when someone knocked it over. I learned to snake a clogged drain. Piece by piece, I reclaimed it not as a relic of a shared life, but as something new, something entirely mine. I never needed more space than these 3 bedrooms gave me, one for sleep, one for sewing, one I never touched, though it still smelled faintly of wood glue and teenage cologne. Lauren Mitchell's old room. I kept it clean just in case she came back, just in case she needed me again. She doesn't, not really. She calls on holidays text when she's short on time. Sometimes she brings the boys by if Brian Mitchell's working a weekend shift. But mostly she visits when she needs something. School donations of bridge loan help with pickups. Still, I pretend not to notice. I make tea. I offer cookies. I smile. That's the arrangement we've settled into. She needs I give quietly without resentment, or so I tell myself. The morning light through the dining room window throws soft rectangles on the tablecloth. I'm folding a kitchen towel when I hear the gravel crunch under tires. Not the mail truck, not the neighbors. A bigger car, a heavier sound. I glance out and see Lauren Mitchell's SUV pulling into the driveway, slow and deliberate like it belongs there. The boys aren't with her. Brian Mitchell is. I smooth the towel again, even though it's already flat. The doorbell rings, not a knock. A ring. Formal final. I press my palms to the counter. The granite is cool beneath my skin. The flowers outside sway gently oblivious. I open the door. Lauren Mitchell smiles too bright and leans in for a hug. Brian Mitchell hovers behind her, grinning like someone who's already been congratulated. She holds a bakery box in her hands. Lemon tart. Probably. She knows I prefer savory. We brought dessert, she says. That's not why they're here. The lemon tart is too sweet. The crust crumbles too easily and sticks to the plate in damp patches as if it's trying to hold on. Lauren Mitchell slices it with the kind of enthusiasm that makes me wonder if she thinks this gesture, this offering, somehow softens what's to come. They've brought their own forks. That's new. We sit around at the dining table, the one Edward Blake sanded smooth himself the summer after his second bypass. The chairs wobble slightly, and I've always meant to fix them. Lauren Mitchell places her phone face down beside her plate and glances toward the hallway toward the room that used to be hers. Brian Mitchell talks. He always talks about the kids' swim team, about gas prices, about a new TV that practically thinks for you. I nod and respond when appropriate, the way I've learned to do when he's on a roll. It's easier to let the words wash over than try to guide them anywhere. Then the room stills. Lauren Mitchell leans forward, hands folded, voice pitched a half step lower than before. Her tone shifts from casual to careful, and I brace without realizing it. So she says, "We've talked it through and we've made a decision." I look at her, then at Brian Mitchell, whose smile has gone from friendly to firm. There's a moment of rehearsed silence, the kind that signals something isn't being offered, it's being delivered. "They'll be moving into your house next month," she says. It's not a suggestion, it's a pronouncement. My fork rests against the edge of my plate. I don't blink. I don't flinch. Instead, I offer them the only thing they aren't prepared for, a smile. "Perfect," I say with a lightness that surprises even me. "I'll start packing this weekend." Brian Mitchell exhales and Lauren Mitchell reaches across the table as if she's touched by my understanding. I let her fingers brush mine, but don't squeeze back. He launches into logistics before the room has even settled. The kids will love the backyard. The guest room will be perfect for his office. The kitchen needs a bit of modernizing. Maybe knock down that wall to open it up. Lauren Mitchell's already making plans about color schemes and storage bins. They're carving me out before I've left. The house I repaired, repainted and reimagined mine has already become theirs in the way they speak. I let it happen. I clear the plates and rinse them my back to the room. They talk over me, cheerful and full of momentum like people decorating a blank canvas. I dry my hands slowly and turn back toward them. Lauren Mitchell is talking about nursery wallpaper. Brian Mitchell is scrolling on his phone, showing her a kitchen island made of reclaimed wood. They look comfortable, rooted, triumphant. I nod and murmur something agreeable. Then I reach for the dish rag, fold it neatly, and lay it flat on the counter. I know what I have to do. Lauren Mitchell didn't always sound like that. There was a time she asked instead of announced a time. Her voice still held hesitation when she needed help. I remember her freshman year of college standing in our driveway in a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, the sleeves pulled over her hands. "I'm short for the deposit," she said. I didn't want to ask, but I gave her the money the next morning. No questions. Just a check slid into her palm with a hug. She didn't quite return. That was the beginning of the quiet ledger I started keeping. Not in bitterness, just in awareness. I co-signed her car loan 2 years later when Brian Mitchell lost his job and they couldn't qualify. I watched her drive off in a newer model than I'd ever owned, never mentioning that the payments defaulted once, and the creditor called me not them. After Edward Blake passed, I started tutoring 2 nights a week. It wasn't for the money, really. It was to feel useful. But when Lauren Mitchell needed someone to watch the boys after school, I gave up the job without hesitation. She promised it was temporary just until we can afford after-a. That was 4 years ago. She never offered to pay me. I never asked. There was the vacation I canceled to stay home with the kids when they had the flu, the sewing machine I sold to help cover their moving costs, the room I emptied so they'd have somewhere to stay for just a few weeks when the plumbing burst in their old rental. Every time I gave it felt like love. Every time I stepped aside, told myself I was being a good mother. Brian Mitchell said once over grilled chicken in the backyard, "You'll never be alone. Marjorie Blake will take care of you when the time comes." I believed him. Now I see what he meant. They'd always planned to step in when I was in the way, not to care for me, but to use what I'd built as a stepping stone for what they couldn't. The past 20 years weren't a series of isolated favors. They were a slow and quiet erosion of my place in their world. I didn't disappear all at once. I faded. In every choice that put their comfort above my boundaries, I gave up a little more ground. And now they're moving in not out of desperation, but because they believe it's owed. I step into my sewing room that night, still lined with fabric I haven't touched in months. Lauren Mitchell wants it for the nursery. She already said so. I run my hand along the edge of the table and let the silence settle around me. They think the house is already theirs. Let them keep thinking that. The next morning, I watered the peonies as usual, clipped the dead heads, and waved at Mrs. Adler across the street like I always do. Nothing about me had changed on the outside. I still moved slowly, folded laundry, with care brewed tea at 10, but something inside had tilted. The floor of what I used to tolerate was giving way. After breakfast, I found her number in the drawer beside the phone, Danielle Ruiz. She'd been one of my students 15 years ago, sharp, precise, never afraid to speak up. I'd written her a glowing recommendation for college. She still sent a Christmas card every year tucked with a small photo of her growing twins. Her name was now printed beneath a glossy gold Really logo in town. I called her before I had a chance to change my mind. "Marjorie Blake," she said, her voice blooming with recognition. "It's been forever." "I need to sell my house," I said, skipping the pleasantries quietly fast. No online listings, no signs in the yard, and I need it gone before my daughter shows up with moving boxes. There was a pause, but not from judgment, just calculation. "Understood," she said simply. Within 24 hours, she had buyers lined up, investors, young families, and one recently married couple eager to settle before their baby arrived. I told her I wanted a clean sale, preferably to someone who knew what it meant to earn a home, not just inherit it. In the meantime, I crafted the perfect lie. I called Lauren Mitchell with cheerful energy and said, "I've decided to repaint the whole interior before you all move in for the baby's lungs. You know, fresh chemical-free paint, low VOCCs, the works." She gushed, and I let her. I added, "The crew insists no one enter the house while the paint cures liability reasons, 3 weeks minimum, but I want it perfect for you." She thanked me as if I were wrapping a gift, not erasing her name from the deed. I packed it night room by room, starting with the sewing supplies and ending with the linen closet. I gave away most of it. I kept only what I could carry in a car. Some things hurt to fold. The quilt Edward Blake never finished. The photo album from when Lauren Mitchell was still small enough to let me braid her hair. But I didn't cry. Not once. Each night I sat at the edge of the bed and made a list. Utilities, insurance, DMV address change. It gave me structure, purpose. It also gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: control. I wrapped the last of the dishes and stacked the boxes by the back door. The peonies were beginning to fall open again. When Danielle called to confirm the offer, I said yes without hesitation. Lauren Mitchell called me just after lunch on a Tuesday. I had just taped shut another box marked Books Donate and was rinsing a chipped mug when her name lit up the screen. I answered out of habit. Her voice bubbled through the line. I finally picked a palette for the living room. I saw it on Pinterest. It's called Coastal Calm Sage Green Walls with White Trim. Isn't that peaceful? She didn't wait for my response. Oh, and Brian Mitchell says we should start converting the sewing room into the nursery right away. The light in there is perfect. And it's the only space that doesn't feel like a guest room. Don't worry. We'll move your sewing stuff into the garage or storage. She laughed like this was all just part of a fun home makeover, like the house wasn't still mine. I gripped the counter, studying myself. The sewing room had no crib, no rocking chair, no mobile hanging from the ceiling, but it was already gone. I said something polite and non-committal and got off the phone as quickly as I could. After I hung up, I stood in the center of that little room and tried to imagine its new colors: sage green, white trim, coastal calm. All I could feel was a razor. That room had been my quiet place since Edward Blake died. The table was uneven, and the shelves slumped slightly, but it had been mine. A room made for creation, not caretaking. Now they wanted to wipe it clean, wrap it in a trendy shade of detachment, and fill it with someone else's beginnings. That night, Danielle brought the couple by Landon and Priya Keller, early 30s, expecting. They stood in the front yard as the last of the peonies began to open. She touched her belly when she spoke. He walked the perimeter of the yard like it already mattered. They asked thoughtful questions. They noticed the little things, the built-in shelves Edward Blake made, the sturdy gate on the side of the house, the quiet curve of the cul-de-sac. They looked not just at the structure, but at the effort. They reminded me of what Lauren Mitchell and Brian Mitchell used to be before the demands were placed to the gratitude before the visits became announcements. I showed them the house, every room, even the one that had already been claimed in someone else's mind. They smiled in the sewing room. "This space is perfect for a nursery," Priya whispered. She said it differently, not with assumption, with awe. I nodded and closed the door softly behind her. Danielle called 2 days later. "The Kellers want to offer full price, all cash, no contingencies, and they'll close within 2 weeks." I didn't pause. I accept. I said it wasn't just a transaction. It was a transfer of ownership, not just of walls and beams, but of memory, of meaning, of a life that was mine until someone else assumed it was theirs. Now, it was going to someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. I hung up the phone and walked to the hallway where my last 3 boxes waited. By the time the sun touched the tips of the backyard fence on Saturday morning, I was already 2 states away. The last box had been loaded the night before, tucked neatly into the back of a borrowed van. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave keys under a mat. I left nothing behind that belonged to me. The Kellers were moving in early that morning. I had called them just after closing to offer a small gesture, a few flower pots, a clean set of curtains still in their packaging. Priya sounded thrilled. Landon promised they'd keep the garden cared for. At 900, Lauren Mitchell and Brian Mitchell pulled into the driveway with a rented moving truck and 2 confused boys in the back seat. I imagine Brian Mitchell left the engine running while he marched toward the porch. I imagine Lauren Mitchell stepped out with her phone in hand, already filming a before video for the nursery. What they saw instead was Landon's sleeves rolled, watering the peonies. I wasn't there, but I could guess how it went. Brian Mitchell puffed himself up, asking where I was, asking why a stranger was on his porch. Lauren Mitchell probably assumed it was a contractor, maybe a mistake, but then Landon introduced himself politely, calmly as the new owner, not the tenant, not the painter. The owner. My phone number had been disconnected the day before. They couldn't reach me no matter how many times they tried. Lauren Mitchell must have tried calling Danielle, too. She wouldn't have answered. Not on a Saturday morning. I picture Brian Mitchell demanding to see a deed. Landon would have obliged. I can see the thick manila envelope pulled from a drawer by the door. Names printed clearly, notarized, and final. Lauren Mitchell would have gone pale, not angry, yet, just stunned. But Brian Mitchell, he would have yelled. Loud, indignant, accusatory, the kind of voice that fills a cold sack and makes neighbors peek through curtains. One of them wouldn't need to peek. Mrs. Adler, who never misses her morning walk, happened to be coming up the sidewalk right about then. She'd slow down just enough to take in the scene. She'd see Lauren Mitchell gesturing wildly, Brian Mitchell pacing Landon, standing firm but confused. She wouldn't say a word, just a small shake of the head. She's seen this kind of thing before, not this exact version, of course, but she's old enough to know what it looks like when someone finally stops asking for space and takes it. When someone who always said yes finally disappears without explaining. They must have stayed there longer than they should have. Maybe sat in the truck waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. Back in my motel room, I unpacked my clothes in silence. I took out the photo of Edward Blake I'd wrapped in a dish towel and placed it by the lamp. It was the first night in years that I didn't feel watched. I arrived in Sedona, Arizona on a Wednesday afternoon. The desert air dry and warm against my skin. The streets looked smaller than I remembered, but the sky was just as wide. I'd been here once on a school field trip in the early 80s. 14 kids in matching t-shirts and sunburned faces. I had stood outside a pottery shop and thought, one day I'll come back here alone. Now I had. The adobe rental was modest. Tucked between a bookstore and a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and chili powder, the landlord gave me the keys with barely a glance, and I stepped into the quiet with only 2 suitcases and a cooler of dry goods I couldn't bear to throw away. There was a small patch of yard in the back, just big enough for herbs and a few stubborn flowers. I stood there for a long time that evening, dirt under my nails, imagining the shape of things I hadn't planted yet. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either, just still as if something that had been rattling inside me for years had finally gone quiet. I opened my phone and scrolled through old messages I didn't need to keep. Birthday photos, grocery lists, pleas disguised as plans. I tapped Lauren Mitchell's name and blocked the number, not in anger, just necessity. Some doors closed without slamming. Then I opened my notebook, the one I used to keep by the bed for grocery lists and scattered thoughts. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "They mistook my silence for surrender." It was a countdown. That sentence felt heavier than the boxes I'd carried, more final than the keys I'd handed over. I thought about Marisol, how she hadn't asked questions, just followed through. A professional, and yes, but also someone who'd once sat in my classroom believing she could build something better, and she had. I sent her one text, "Thank you. I'm finally home." Then I set the phone down and stepped outside where the soil was dry, the light low and nothing. Not a single square foot of ground belonged to anyone but me. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen I hadn't used in years, the ink slightly dry at first. The words came slower than I expected, but they came just the same. Dear Lauren Mitchell, I'm not writing to hurt you. I'm writing to say thank you. You reminded me what happens when we forget to draw lines, when we teach people that our silence means yes. You reminded me what it feels like to be erased in my own home and how quickly I remembered who I was once someone tried to claim it. I built that house not with bricks and nails, but with evenings spent folding laundry while your father snorted in the next room, with meals cooked even after long days, with holidays patched together on tight budgets, with 1,000 choices made quietly in everyone else's favor. You didn't steal it, you just believed it was already yours. But here's what you never asked, what it meant to me. That house was never a placeholder. It wasn't a thing I planned to leave behind like old jewelry or recipe cards. It was the one space in the world where every decision, every corner was mine to live in. You tried to inherit something I hadn't finished living in. I suppose in your mind it was a kindness, an assumption dressed as generosity, but it wasn't yours to give, and it wasn't mine to lose. Not like that. So, thank you for helping me remember that leaving isn't always the same as losing. I folded the paper once then again, then slid it into the fireplace I hadn't lit until tonight. The flames caught slowly curling the edge of the page inward. I didn't watch it burn all the way down. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, brought my dinner out to the patio, and sat beneath the open sky. The night was warm and still, the silence not empty, but whole. I took a bite and closed my tab.